Greetings, curious acolytes of the galaxy, and welcome back to the archives. We've been expecting you. I don't believe it is an exaggeration at all to say that the Sith as their order as a whole have been the galaxy's greatest plague since their inception. In the year 6900 BBY, the 100-year darkness would come to a close, as the Dark Jedi led by a Junta Pao would be squashed, and only a handful of them would be left alive. The Jedi made possibly the greatest mistake their order had ever made by not simply killing these Dark Jedi prisoners, and instead opting to banish them to the unknown regions. Upon these Dark Jedi finding the world of Korriban, the rest is history, and they gave rise to the most infamous group of people in all of galactic history. The dark side was with them, and even though the Sith lost war after war repeatedly, they would continuously find ways to rise up once again to challenge the Jedi, and whatever form of the Republic was still standing. This finally changed as Darth Bane would pull a move that would ultimately save the Sith from utter destruction, by ironically destroying the Sith themselves and implementing the Sith rule of two. From this brilliant scheme, the legacy of the Sith lived on, and their revenge was fulfilled by the Dark Lord Sidious, who instated the First Galactic Empire totally ruled by the Sith. That too, though, would eventually fail, as the Jedi rose up from the brink of destruction. In Legends, the Sith would live on, as the lost tribe of the Sith came from the shadows, and then there was of course Darth Krayt and the Sith rule of one. The story of the Sith Order is one that many already know, but what exactly happened to the Sith Order after this, and after the deaths of Vader and Sidious? We know that Darth Krayt was eventually killed, so how did the Sith Order die out in the end? What became of them in the distant future? And what was the final end of the Sith? In this holocron, my dear friends and acolytes, we are going to uncover the truth of what actually happened to the Sith Order, and how they sadly had an anticlimactic fall into total extinction. This extinction ultimately can be traced back to the shoulders of one man, Darth Krayt. Possibly one of the most powerful Sith Lords in history, Darth Krayt was surely the future of the Sith after the fall of Sidious. The previous Emperor might have been the culmination of the Sith knowledge, but Krayt really had it in the power department, and completely did away with the rule of two, with Krayt stating that he believed that it was this principle that cost Sidious his utter victory. In Krayt's mind, Bane had made a mistake with the rule of two. It might have been useful for the time being, but Sidious himself should have done away with it once the Galactic Empire was instated. According to Krayt and his followers, had Sidious gathered an army of Sith, his death at the hands of his apprentice on the Death Star either would have never happened in the first place, or would have had little consequence. In the words of Darth Warlock, one of the disciples of Krayt, wisely, Darth Krayt has undone the mistakes of Bane. Therefore, no rule of two limits the one Sith today. It was Krayt who instated the rule of one, a system that meant to ensure the total dominance of the Sith, but ironically, the very thing that destroyed them in the end. So how did the Sith rule of one actually work? And was Darth Krayt correct? Spoiler alert, he was not. The whole point of the One Sith hinged on the ideology wherein there was a single Dark Lord of the Sith who led many lesser Sith, along with other minions and acolytes. The One represented the Sith Order itself, a unified and cohesive group of Sith who restrained themselves from infighting and were fanatically obedient to the One, in this case that being Darth Krayt. We know that this sounds very similar to how the flawed Sith Lords of the ancient times maneuvered. However, Krayt had fixed their mistake. He eliminated the need for infighting by ensuring that every one of them were zealously, yet even religiously loyal to him. This would keep anyone from attempting to rise up and take his place. The practice of one apprentice per master was retained. However, there were many masters. Also retained was the practice of slaying a master once an apprentice's training was complete. However, this was not done to continue the rule of the strong, but rather to show one's faith and devotion to Krayt and the Sith cause. To put it simply, the rule of one took the strengths from all the previous Sith rules, the strength in numbers from the ancient days, the backstabbing strength of the rule of two, and Krayt attempted to embody a ruler that his followers would have total loyalty to, similar to the likes of the ancients such as Marka Ragnos. On paper, this was a brilliant plan, and for a while it worked. Except there was one fatal flaw, and that flaw existed in Krayt himself. Cade Skywalker knew this secret. By placing himself as the glue to bind together all of the Sith, the One, Krayt had inadvertently made himself their greatest strength and yet their greatest weakness. This wasn't seen by the Jedi either, but also by the spirits and holocron guardians of the ancient Sith. Obviously, Darth Bane thought that they were heretics, but even Darth Nihilus and Darth Endedu thought that the Sith One were fools, pointing out that their lack of line of succession would cause the One Sith to collapse if Darth Krayt were ever to be killed. While on paper the rule of One Sith Sith worked, if Darth Krayt were to die, it would all die. Krayt was far too trusting in his abilities to stay alive, which was why he was searching for the secret to essence transfer. But the ancient Sith Lords that had this knowledge refused to give it to him. Instead, they went as far as to call him and his whole order pretenders. The mistake that the one Sith made was acting like the rule of two was ineffectual and flawed, when it was the very thing that ensured the survival of the Sith as long as it had been. The rule of two saved the Sith, and these new Sith did not appreciate it or take aspects from it to implement into their rule of one. Maybe it was indeed time to raise an army of Sith, but Krayt shouldn't have expected himself to stay alive forever. This vain notion was the exact thing that Darth Bane fought directly against. All the Sith in the Baneite era accepted that they were expendable to the cause and welcomed their deaths with open arms. Fear of death and succession was what made the Sith weak in the first place. Ultimately, the ancient Sith would be proven correct upon Darth Krayt's final death at the hands of Cade Skywalker. Control of the Sith Order passed to Darth Nihil, and the one Sith continued to follow him loyally. Problem in that is that none of the Sith of this time were anywhere close to the level that Krayt was at, and the Jedi didn't even need to pursue the Sith, deeming them a non-threat, which normally would have been a massive mistake, but here it actually makes sense. The Sith Lords would eventually scatter and collapse, as the Sith Lord known as Darth Red would eventually kill Nihil and assume leadership. Red had actually adhered to the rule of two, and exposed the one Sith for their weakness. The other Sith, such as Darth Scythe and Darth Talon, had left, either being killed or fallen into obscurity. Unfortunately for the Sith Order itself, Darth Red had failed to acquire an apprentice before he was killed by Nia Solo, securing yet another assumed extinction of the Sith Order. So yes, Darth Talon, Scythe, and some of the others did survive, or so we believe. There doesn't exist any information on what happened to them after this point in time, but one may reasonably assume that one of them, likely Darth Talon, would attempt to revive the Sith Order yet again. The only problem is, they were all fanatically devoted to Darth Krayt, and without his strength and brilliant leadership, the Sith were more or less at a loss for what to do next. People want to blame Darth Red for his erroneous decision and failure to make the rule of two work again, but the ultimate death of the Sith Order doesn't sit squarely on his shoulders. I believe it is Darth Krayt, ironically the last great Sith Lord, that all of the fault can be levied at his feet, with the ancient Sith telling him as much. Krayt was indeed extremely powerful and an intelligent Dark Lord, and he came very close to winning the entire galaxy back for the Sith. His wisdom, though, is where he failed. Krayt was far too bold in assuming that he would live forever, and should have known that even the best Sith Lords have always been conquered some way or another. If he intended to live forever like Sidious wanted to, and Endedu almost did, then he should have instated an apprentice as a contingency, while searching for the secret to immortality. Let's hypothetically say that he did this. He took someone that he trusted like Talon, Warlock, pre his betrayal, or Scythe, and instated them as a sort of a decoy leader. Someone he could basically control like a puppet while he operated from the shadows. Krayt would keep his identity a secret and operate the Sith through proxies and puppet minions. All the while, he would continue searching for the secret to immortality or essence transfer. By the time he found it, he would emerge from the shadows and take his place, mirroring the same process by which Darth Vitiate had risen to power. In this way, Krayt would be able to accomplish what Vitiate did without being impeded by the entire Jedi and Sith orders like Vitiate was in his day, which was Vitiate's fatal flaw. By doing this, temporarily staying out of the limelight, he could accomplish his plan of setting up the rule of one and keeping himself living forever, while always having another clone body or host vessel in his back pocket. Krayt had died once, having been killed by Darth Warlock, but he survived by sheer use of his powers. It would be at that moment that he should have found the secret to dark transfer and set up another body in case that this ever happened again. That way, Krayt would not have had to heal his broken body again and again, and could have perhaps lived forever as the rule of one, if he had simply adopted these changes. But anyway, my friends, what do you think Darth Krayt should have done differently? And what are your thoughts on the final extinction of the Sith? Do you think that Krayt was right and that Darth Red is to blame? Or do you think that the blame lies with Krayt and his flawed ideology on the Sith? Let us know in the comments down below. And as always, my friends, may the Force be with you, and I hope to see you soon.